Hello, everyone, and welcome to this ninth episode place for us to discuss innovation, challenges, and general gossip on aviation. My name is Jacob Young. I'm the Manager Operational Performance based in Prestwick Centre in Scotland. Although, as you'll see from our webcams, most of us are still working from home. I'm delighted to be in the host seat this month, especially as we're here to talk about such an interesting topic and one that I've been involved with over the last few years. Back in April 2010, the airspace over the UK and much of Northern Europe was effectively closed as a massive plume of volcanic ash filled the sky above us, leaving millions of passengers stranded all over the world. Even after a year of COVID-related travel restrictions, the eruptions of E15, and I'll come back to that name a little bit later, remains one of the more remarkable episodes in the recent history of European aviation. But there's no one better qualified to help us guide through those events 11 years ago than the people that we've got with us today. So I'm very pleased to introduce you to Arnie Gudbranson, Eyjafjallajökull ANS's senior ATM expert, Captain Rich Stark, retired, a senior flight representative for Delta, and also a flight ops subject matter expert for IATA. And lastly, Gav Dixon, NATS ops supervisor, and one of my previous mentors who's taught me a lot about oceanic matters, also based in Prestwick Centre with me. So good afternoon to you, Gav, and also to you, Arnie, who's joining us from Iceland today. And a very good morning to you, Rich, who's joining us from Atlanta, Georgia.
Hey, Jacob.
Hi.
So let's just get straight into it. And maybe before we start, Arnie, can you tell me what I'm talking about when I say E15? And it's actually the main reason you're invited today.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this episode of Altitude. Very honored. Thank you. And E15 is, as far as I understand, because the whole world had a trouble pronouncing the name of the culprit. It was it starts with an E and has 15 letters after that. So that's what the U.S. Air Force, I was told, used to use when they were referring to the volcano, which is called Eyjafjallajökull. It's very simple, very simple.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Arnie. And I'll stick with you, I think, on this one. So for those of us, or for those of people that aren't familiar with it, can you talk us through what happened 11 years ago from your perspective? So what were you doing at the time, and when did you know this was going to be a real issue?
I think it was very early on that we knew that this was something big, because a few weeks earlier we had another eruption not far from Eyjafjallajökull, or E15, and which was a lava event, and didn't stir anything up in the aviation world. But this was coming from underneath a glacier, so that was fairly early on. It was obvious that it was going to cause some disturbance, which it did. And in April 2010, I was working at Reykjavik ACC. I was working both as an active air traffic controller and also as a shift manager. So I had multiple roles working for in the event. And also, furthermore, the ACC is part of the Iceland's national crisis team, and has in that center for that crisis team a position, which I went and it's located only 650 meters from the Reykjavik ACC. So early in the event, I went up there to act as a coordinator between the ACC and the ATM and the crisis coordination team and the authorities and the government. And a couple of times I was asked to, when the relevant ministers of the government came for a visit to the president, I was asked to give them a status report in regards to aviation.
That's pretty exciting, and I guess everyone that was involved with it at the time suddenly became the most important people in the company. And I'll move on to you, Gav, and talk to you about the NATS perspective. So when did you first hear about this eruption? At what point did you know this was going to be a real issue? And what recollections do you have of the day?
So I think I was aware the day before of the eruption, but I was due on shift at what we would call an office day that day on the 15th. I think if we put a graph up on the screen now for the viewers, As an operational supervisor for the ocean at the time, as well as being a valid controller, the image that you're probably seeing now is what we were faced with in terms of what we were to look forward to for the day. So that, and for the, as it turned out, for the next 6 days. So this information was really the kind of fundamental plan that we would then be working around. In a situation for out of area traffic, a lot of those aircraft have already departed. The ash cloud was harnessed by the jet streams, which were in absolutely the wrong place. So we had the wind pretty much just blowing towards the UK and Northern Europe, harnessing that ash and causing this basic block for that civil aviation flow that was the eastbound flow heading towards the UK. So, as I recall, we had a much more dynamic oceanic operation that morning. I think the first image you'll see is the 600 Zulu image, and you could see 6 hourly progressions along for 18 hours ahead. So we're pretty much fundamentally looking at time 0 and then time +6, and trying to work out the best course of action for traffic that was still west of 30 West. So they've been worked by the Gander Centre, or maybe some were working the Icelandic centres, and what to do with the traffic, and obviously then having to deal with tactical requests, turnbacks, rerouting into like a funnel effect, as slowly but surely aerodromes became inaccessible because of this swathe of ash. I must point out also back then, operators could not fly or file through ash clouds, so that added more and more complexity to the day. Plus the fact, and I'll probably bring Rich in a second, if we were getting reports from aircrew of smell, of sulfuric smell or any other indicator, we would then be taking that back, feeding that back to the Met Office accordingly. So I probably spoke to Arnie and Rich in some way on that day. I don't know if you can remember my voice, Arnie.
Yeah, it was the most panicked when I heard that day. So. But I mean, maybe I can add to that there has been some research, and the wind direction that day is a very common wind direction. So just for the future, very often the wind is blowing towards the UK and Northwest Europe. So look forward to that.
That's why it's always cold here. Just going on from that, Gav. So back then I was a trainee, so that was probably fortunate that I wasn't in the ops room at the time. But I get a lot of people telling me about how it was a bit of a ghost town, and we had a couple of really challenging sectors. Everything else was quiet. Can you tell me about those couple of sectors? What was going on? What was going through the controllers' minds at the time?
Well, I think so. Talking about the oceanic operation, but then the domestic sectors themselves. Sometimes, I mean, we do get used to particular times of day with standard routings, and when you have a situation where, say, certain sectors that would normally be quiet became overloaded effectively with traffic, we then would have to deal with that tactically. So in that case, we would be double manning the sectors and talking to ACM if we needed to, or capacity management if we needed to employ any kind of flow measure. So yes, it was an extremely dynamic and fluid day where you would have situations of holding in sectors that you never normally would experience such a thing.
Yeah, that must have been super challenging for all the supervisors in on that day. And probably even more challenging was for the pilots. So I'll come over to Rich and talk about maybe how familiar you were, or pilots were, at the time of this event. How familiar were they with ash events and the risk that was posed by them? And was it like anything that you'd encountered before? Oh, Rich, you're just on mute there. Thank you. The joys of Teams.
Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you, Jacob, Arnie, and Gavin for your comments. Yes, was well aware. I think it's important for the audience to understand that operators deal with volcanic ash, volcanic eruptions on a daily basis. It's part of the operation, depending on where you're flying to. But so it's something we deal with constantly. In this particular case, obviously, this was a major event of great significance. And I wasn't flying on the day of the eruption, but I was flying several days later and got to see the eruption firsthand from 35,000 feet crossing the northern portion of Iceland. So quite dramatic. At the time, I was involved with training new captains and new co-pilots in the international environment. So it was a great opportunity to use this event to discuss the significant aspects of volcanic ash and eruptions themselves. In the cockpit, we deal with procedures that are delineated to us by the operating or the original equipment manufacturer, either Boeing or Airbus in our case, to give us guidance. And then, of course, the different ICAO documents to talk about volcanic ash and flight crew procedures. So I would say most of all at the time, our thanks to air traffic management from an operator perspective and what they had to deal with and giving us their best guidance possible.
I appreciate that, Rich. I mean, I can take no credit as a trainee, but Gav and Arnie can certainly take some of that credit there.
Thanks, Rich.
No, sincerely, it was obviously something beyond what anybody could imagine at the time, and a significant, as you mentioned, a significant disruption of all the traffic, and a serious look, obviously, since then as to you know, what is of significance in an ash cloud, what can an operator decide to do, what the engine manufacturers since have decided what is a acceptable density of particulate matter in the cloud and things of those nature. I know we'll get to that discussion later, but
well, just while we're on that, Rich, what's actually the impact on an engine? So when ash is ingested into an engine, what starts to happen?
So we have several telltale signs of any sort of ash. Hopefully the first one is a notice from our dispatcher that we're in an area of a known eruption. So corporately at Delta Airlines, we use what we call turbulence plots, where our dispatcher coordinates with the volcanic ash advisory centers throughout the globe to determine whether or not we're going to either just be issued an alert for that area because there is some sort of ash cloud, but it's not at the altitude we're flying at, or an avoid position. But in this case, an aircraft that might have been in that airspace and the telltale signs in the cockpit are an acrid odor, a haze, any sort of glazing on the windshield. And as far as the engines themselves, the silicate that's in the ash cloud, once it gets in the engine, it melts and can then be deposited into the hot section of the engine and cause the engine to flame out. So the immediate procedures in the event of something of that nature, when you're, I should have mentioned airspeed fluctuation as well as pitot tubes and static probes get blocked. But you know, our procedures are to get out of the cloud as rapidly as possible. So that entails a 180-degree turn, a reduction in power to cool the engine to a point where it's not melting the silicate into the engine, and then descending because you pulled the power back. And obviously, we're desperately relying on ATC to help us out in these events.
Absolutely, and you know, our guidance that we have is to take all the information that the pilot's providing us and provide multiple solutions if they're available. In an event like this, they're not always available, and a lot of the time we're relying on the pilots adopting contingency procedures and us providing traffic information whenever we can to get over that immediate issue.
Absolutely.
It's always the aviate, navigate, communicate bits, right? So a couple of days on or into the event, then I'm going to come over to Arnie maybe on this one. So once we're in a few days, what were the airlines saying, you know, as a general feedback to you, to Gav, to the rest of the ANSPs? What frustration was out there, knowing that passengers were stranded all over the world?
I mean, first of all, thank you, Rich, for your comment. And I think this kind of an event is a cooperation. And speaking from when I was working as a controller, talking to the aircraft, there was no frustration there. It was just procedures from them and from us, and we were just kind of helping each other get through this. So there was no frustration there. I mean, possibly from the airline operators who were dealing with the passengers and the flight dispatching or something like that. But I think mainly with the passengers, that was the heavy, and that didn't come, of course, to our desk. But when I was working at the crisis center, that's when I heard about all those things. And but for instance, from our perspective in Iceland, kind of we were kind of in of course, a unique position. We had the culprit on the island, and it was either blowing to the northeast, west, or south, and either way, we could always find a way around it from there. So sometimes the only flights available from Scotland or UK were to Iceland. So we had possibly a tiny bit different kind of. The airport weren't closed that often, but still we had Iceland Air moved its hub to Akureyri in the north of the country to continue flying for a while. So I think as Rich, the sentiment from Rich was that this was something we were working on this together, and this was a project that it was kind of like all hands on deck to take on this project and work on this together.
Yeah. Jacob, Rich, just real quick, sorry, Gavin. What I would offer or add to that, and thank you for your comments, Arnie, is I think what happened, after, as we moved into this event, what we saw was a lot of airspace being closed down, a lot of various countries, kind of a discordant, if you will, shutdown of the airspace, either by the ANSPs or by the regulators themselves. And I think that's the point of this conversation, and certainly what's happened since then, to sort out what can we do, what can the operators be allowed to do, what can we do going forward in the case of another event like this, because yes, there was a lot of coordination, but then there was a lot of confusion at the initial stages of this.
I think we're starting to get this right now, and a couple of Gav and Arnie on the call have been majorly involved with rewriting the volcanic ash contingency plan over a number of years. But there were some quick procedures that were needed as well, right, Gav? So when the actual volcanic ash ended, and it was pretty abrupt, to go from airspace closed to airspaces reopening, we had people wanting to get back desperately back to the UK or departing from the UK. So what were we doing at that time?
So I can recall, first, just taking it back a step, it was great that we already had procedures in place. We used to test these procedures regularly in the operation. And I'll be honest with you, me included, most of us thought we'd never need to employ them. So there we were, we had this catastrophic event. But the good news was we had some procedures to deal with it, but we were working with rules that were maybe appropriate at the time. But then upon review and upon what we know today, perhaps they were quite hard procedures, but the default is always safety, and that's the good thing. That's what we did. But certainly, back to your original question, then there was increasing pressure commercially, globally, if you like, and then when our CAA required us to look at procedures so that we could accept traffic, we worked through those very, very quickly. In fact, I was involved in one or two of what we would call an APSARA procedural review of the new procedures coming in to sign them off so that we could use them very quickly. So yeah, I do recall that. And as I say, today we are in a much better place in terms of service impact. But I will go back and say that we did, I think, based on what we were all dealing with at the time, we dealt with a very catastrophic event, and we kept everything safe. So that was always our main, and always will be, our main concern.
Thank you, Gav. And I guess that leads nicely into a discussion with Arnie about upcoming simulations and what we do now with our annual Volcax events. Arnie's the co-chair for Volcax. Actually, I could be wrong with that. The last time we spoke, you were the co-chair. I'll pass over to you, though, to discuss it a little bit more.
Okay. Yes, you are correct. I am co-chair with Eurocontrol on the Volcax 21, which was supposed to be Volcax 20. And the theme in that exercise was to remember a 10-year anniversary of Eyjafjallajökull and the eruption there. And so kind of also to, at the end of it, kind of step back and see where were we then and where are we now. So, but I also want to say that Gavin was correct on before the eruption of 2010, we had the procedures, and we got to give credit where credit is due to the people. I think it was NATS and Iceland who possibly started the first contingency plan, but of course everybody became involved, the airline operators and ICAO and Eurocontrol. So, but the procedures were there and the exercises were there. So we had some sort of a picture of what it might look like, and that's maybe because that had been exercised. This was we were fairly quick to go into the procedures. But in regards to the exercise coming up this November, it'll be on the November 16th, and of course, and there's a workshop in Reykjavik on October 5 and 6, and I urge everybody who has a place there to urge them to participate in the exercise.
Yeah, we'll certainly be participating, Arnie, whether or not we're live at the prep meeting or virtual. We'll see as it gets closer, but we certainly will be participating and exercising our full procedures, both in Prestwick, Swanwick, our communication cells, Attic. Essentially, we'll be going through the full procedures from our side to see what the impact would be today. And just on that, are we expecting anything soon, Arnie? Any actual live events? How's the rumblings in Reykjavik right now?
I can promise anything, but there are signs. I think there are 5. Of course, we have the ongoing one who's going on right now. I can sometimes see the action through my office window, but it's a lava kind of event. And but Arnie, there are 5. Sorry,
Arnie, you called that one when I spoke to you a tourist volcano, did you not?
Yes, you can use that. There's a lot of tourists who have been walking up to it and on it, and so it is a good opportunity. It's a spectacular event to look at. And but there are, according to the volcanologists at the Icelandic Met Office, there are 5 volcanoes who are showing signs of possible eruption. There's expansion and earthquakes and all kinds of signs of movement around them. So it's definitely going to happen, but there's always that issue of when.
Absolutely. And I guess during our Volcax, the ones I've been involved with, there's been a big discussion about who makes decisions. So if an airline wants to take off and fly through the cloud, we now have a new approach to that, right? We don't close the airspace. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? And
yeah, sure. We have, In November 2014, there were some changes made to the documentation of ICAO, because before, and which is one of the reasons that these areas of closed airspace were so big, and much of them in 2010 was because, as Gavin mentioned, that there was no issuance of clearances of aircraft through forecasted or reported areas of ash. So that was the reason. But in 2014, the rules were changed, and now with the help of the SRA, or Safety Risk Assessment method, airlines can now categorize them and see where they make a decision where how much of an area they want to fly into, and now it's in the hands of the airline operators of making the decision to fly through areas of reported or forecasted as. So it's no longer in the hands of the air traffic control. It's now in the hands of the airline operators. And we have not had, at least in our area, major ash event with a volcano producing a lot of ash into the atmosphere. So we haven't had the real. So we're trying to get a grip on how the situation will be through the exercises. But we'll see.
Jacob, if I could jump in for just a minute here to Arnie's point. First of all, thank you, everybody that's been involved in these contingency plans and what you've done over the last 11 years and maybe even before that, obviously before that as well. Thank you for all of that coordination on behalf of all the operators out there and what you're trying to do. And to Gavin's comment earlier, safety obviously is paramount. It's paramount for you as ATC. It's certainly paramount for the operators and the flight crew as well. So it's exciting to see where we've come in the last 11 years, and look forward to being a part of the exercise.
Thanks, Rich, and thanks, Arnie, for that explanation on the SRA. It's really useful from our side. But Gav, I know neither of us control anymore, but I'm still going to come to you for this question. What would you do if a flight said, no, I'm going straight through the middle of it?
Well, what you should do is advise them of it and the concentration. We do have procedures in place. There is terminology that we'd be using and just advise intentions. That said, we should be ready for the unexpected, as Rich spoke earlier on. Aircraft may then decide to change their mind, change their view, depending on how things progress on their route. But I think that's what we're trained to do. We have set procedures with guidance that we'd always follow. So the controllers would be following that standard phraseology for such an event, but be ready for the unexpected.
Cheers, Gav. And Rich, when a pilot knows that there's volcanic ash ahead of their route, what options do they have? Are they doing it all on their own, planning the route around it, or is there anyone on the ground helping out with this?
So as I mentioned earlier, the first piece of help for any flight crew members is the dispatcher in flight control that should have given the flight information prior to even departing. Once the aircraft is in the air, obviously both the flight crew and the dispatcher are going to be aware of NOTAMs or any SIGMETs that are issued to give the crew appropriate guidance. As we continue on with that, we get into the area of what can the dispatcher do to offer a different route for the aircraft and coordinate that with the flight crew that can then request that routing through ATC. All of that can be done using what's known as controller pilot data link communications, CPDLC. There's a functionality called route clearance uplinks, and it allows, as I just said, for the dispatcher to offer a new routing to the flight crew that then can request it from ATC that then can approve it. That's one way to maneuver the aircraft. The other way to do it is for the ATC to just issue the clearance themselves at the crew's request, or if they feel it's best for them to be in a different piece of airspace, they can do that. So the functionality is there with all the ANSPs in the North Atlantic to offer these CPDLC route clearance uplinks. And I look forward to that becoming a part of the VolSACs going forward, so that we can get all operators involved and ATC involved in using that functionality, however they can use it, however it might help.
Yeah, I think we had a brief discussion on this before, and both ourselves and Reykjavik are more than happy to help progress those thoughts forwards and look at it in the operation. CPDLC offers us such a quick method of communication and route reclearances now. I mean, we use it every day. The North Atlantic pilots are used to it. And we are in a different world to what we were 11 years ago. We've got space-based ADS-B now, so available clearances have significantly increased, where our separations are way, way lower. Minimum separation requirements between aircraft are way lower. And now that we can see the aircraft all the time with such short refresh rates, essentially like a mini radar, it means we can offer a lot better profiles to flights than we may have been able to offer back then. But we're almost into the stage where we ask for some audience questions. So if anybody is still thinking about a question in their mind, please submit it through the chat and we'll try and get it into us. But I'll just finish with one for Gav. And it's, have we got any parallels between what happened in this huge eruption and what's happening right now with the COVID crisis?
Well, impact to aviation is the parallel, but the duration of that impact, obviously, when we dealt with the 6-7 days of huge impact because of the volcano, but as we all know, we're sitting here well past a year and a half, and we're still unsure of when we're going to get out of this. Things are improving. I'm pleased to say operationally. Before this call, in fact, we were all saying that we are feeling it operationally a little bit busier, but who knows, unfortunately, that we're still in that period of uncertainty.
And Jacob, Rich, I would offer that one of the strongest parallels is the significant aspect of the coordination between operators and ATC. I mean, that continues to be the benchmark here, you know, working through a catastrophic volcano exercise or dealing with COVID now and trying to get the aviation industry restarted.
Yeah, I would agree with that. As an example, the EA, European Aviation Crisis Coordination Cell, which kind of became very much used in Eyjafjallajökull in 2010 and has been been active in every event after that, and that has been very, coordination through that has been very useful in COVID-19 also. The teleconferences and the messages between, and the coordination.
Yeah, I'd echo that.
Thank you very much. What we're going to do is move on. I've got a couple of questions that came in before this meeting, and we might not get through everything today. So if anybody did submit a question and we don't get to answer it, we will come back to it afterwards. But the first one was from Adam at Satavia, and he said, how have the volcanic cloud forecast models been updated since 2010? I'm going to come over to you for that one, Arnie.
Yeah, sure. Even though I'm not a volcanologist or a meteorologist, but what I've seen in the discussion is that one of the big things is that at least the London VAC and the Toulouse VAC, they are now using satellite imagery, which is a very important tool to kind of that's one of the new ingredients into the model making. They of course get all kinds of information from Met offices in the area, and they put it all into their model machine, and they've been updating their software and hardware since then. So I think, and then there's a kind of also a new way of interpreting these information, especially after the satellite imagery came in. So there has been some changes done and some updating, and it's more accurate now, even though it's sometimes produces big areas, but that's because the ash is going. There's a lot of ash coming up and it's blowing very fast. So I don't think we'll never get rid of that.
Absolutely. And I certainly from the last Volcax that I was involved with, the concentration charts have become so detailed now, and the information levels has been really useful. Obviously, we're not making those decisions, the pilots are, but it's great to be able to pass on the information that we have quickly as it's coming into the operations. I don't know if it's the same with you, Arnie, but during a Volcax and any actual events, we'd have big maps up available for all our controllers to see very quickly and to update their decision making. Absolutely.
We have methods of taking these maps and projecting them on the air traffic controller situation display, so they have it with the traffic on the screen. So that's very useful.
Like an overhead projector, yeah, from the old school days.
Yeah.
And one other question that we had in then was, are we ever likely to see a practical operational ash detector on board a flight? And I'll come to you for that, Rich.
I don't know of any operators that carry something like that. No, I don't know the answer to that, other than what I mentioned before. Whatever the detector might be, it would maybe be no different than what the flight crew themselves would experience, like I said, with the odor and indications of fluctuations in the airspeed or engine gas temperatures. No, I don't know anything about that.
Jacob, just to add what Arnie said earlier on with the improvements in detection and that true density, that's really useful for us in ATC as we focus on the high concentrations, don't we? So that's absolutely, that really helps us have a much more accurate picture of where things are that will impact us potentially.
Definitely.
And Jacob, just another clarification from your comment earlier. I would say that when you said something to the effect of, will flight crews fly through this? I think it's important that the operators themselves are going to provide the guidance for the flight crews. Obviously, the pilot in command has the ultimate authority for the safety of the aircraft. So these decisions wouldn't necessarily be being made by the pilot themselves. It would be being made by the operator to give the flight crew the guidance that they need.
Well, that's reassuring on our side anyway.
We don't want any Rambos out there.
And we've got a question coming from Graham in IATA, so probably someone you know, Rich. So given the increase in ash detection and dispersion capabilities, what improvements do you want to see over the next decade? And maybe we'll come to you, Arnie, on that one. What would you like to see over the next decade?
No eruptions. No, but no. I think, I mean, what everybody wants is kind of the most, the flow of information to be kind of concentrated or focused and get distributed. I mean, it's just what I would want, and everybody's working towards that in the industry. It's getting some sort of a single point of information, or at least the flow of information to be very rapid. So the air traffic controllers can have the latest information on the eruption to give to the pilots, or the pilots send it to them, or whatever kind of method would be used. But and so I would think that would be an important thing to have in the future. So to have rapid information flow through the industry, or through air traffic control and the airlines.
Arnie, Rich, could I interject just a minute and ask you? I know you already mentioned you're not a volcanics, or whatever that word is, volcanist, but yeah. I don't know the answer, and it's I think it's interesting. In this event, this E15 event, how much notice did you have? I mean, obviously this thing percolated for a while, but I'm not that familiar with. Did you know that this was going to happen within a day, within a week, within a month, or is this just an event that just happens?
It was a couple of hours, I think, that they were calling us, and they saw because they had to break through the glacier. So it took a little while for it to do that. So I can't remember the exact minutes of it, but there were I think a couple of hours where they called, the volcanologists called us, and we are number one on their calling list to let us know that something is about to happen for us to start our procedures. And because we had that other eruption a couple or 3 or 4 5 weeks before in the vicinity, and then they were quite surprised that another one was starting in the same area. So we had some warning of it coming up, and we got the message that it was imminent, and that just gives us another heads up. And when they use the word imminent, we just start working as it has already, if it would have started already. So we started working on those procedures. And there's it could happen on a second's notice, but they have a very good detection grid of all those volcanoes today. So we will always get some sort of for aviation, some sort of a warning, even for the ones that are very fast.
Arnie, I've got a question. I was working on shift when, how do you say, Barumbunga? Is that correct?
Barumbunga
went off, and I think that one, was that not below a glacier as well? We weren't sure how that was going to materialize. I think it may have even seriously been you I spoke to on that night shift. It didn't materialize into anything major. Thankfully that day we put our temporary danger, or you put the temporary danger area around the zone to start with. But was that something that you've obviously been monitoring? There were constant eruptions coming up to that point?
that was a very unusual one, because they noticed that the lava was traveling onto the surface, and underneath the glacier and onto the surface, it was traveling sideways, and it didn't enter the atmosphere until it was clear of the glacier, just north of it. So it became a lava event that didn't have any ash. So just a little puff at the beginning, and that was it. So it kind of worked in our favor. It just traveled through a tunnel underneath and came out north of the glacier. That was very interesting.
That was good news as well.
Yeah, it was.
In the same time, I think you were maybe my boss at the time, Gav, and we were having the same conversations that night about how do we balance this between going into full panic stations.
Never panic stations, Jacob. Correct yourself.
Well, there seemed like some panic around, but it was that fine balance between, do you bring in lots of extra staff just in case, or do you wait and see what happens? And I think we learn through every one of these events, everybody in the industry learns about what the best options are and how we adapt to make sure that we're ready for the next eruption whenever it comes. I'm going to move on to one other question here, which came in about the North Atlantic tracks. So were there any tracks in place on the day, Gav, and were we able to use some of those tracks during the eruption phase? Were the southerly tracks still available?
Yeah, we did. I think, as I recall, we were obviously coordinating a lot of traffic and movement with Gander. So northerly tracks were obviously being impacted to start with. I should have actually got a picture of the track structure that we had in operation that day, but I haven't got that to hand. But I do recall we were moving aircraft south. We were relaying information backwards and forwards between picking up what airfields were open or accessible and what weren't. If we could recall that map that we spoke about earlier on, you could see that slowly but surely drifting further and further south. So Paris maybe was open, Rome maybe was open, but we'd lost Amsterdam. It was that kind of dynamic situation. Okay, relay that back. What are your intentions? Some of the aircraft were turning back before they got to 30 West, and some were not. Some could route further south. It just depended on their destination and what their route and how much fuel they had on board, of course. So yeah, quite an interesting interesting day. But effectively the curtain was slowly drawing down towards the south.
I recall, and I know that Arnie can speak to this, when I flew during the eruption, all the tracks were north of Iceland. The cloud had moved to the south, and all the tracks were over the top of Iceland. So it was quite a view from there. And I will say, again, I'm sorry I don't have my picture, but Mother Nature is a magnificent sight. I mean, to see that eruption and what it was putting out was really quite stark, so to speak.
Yeah, I can vouch for that, Rich, that there were, I think, 5 days where we had winds from the north, straight to the north, and the plume went south all the way to Portugal. It was detected outside of Portugal. So all the tracks, eastbound and westbound, were north of Iceland. So and we had the whole North Atlantic traffic coming. So we had some airlines we had never seen before, and they had never seen that area, and they were like in awe of all the the landscape, and of course the volcanoes. So, and we had quite a lot of traffic going back and forth. It was very interesting days, and that were the days where like all hands on deck, and the staff was divided into two groups, day shifts and night shifts. So everybody was working. So there were 5 days like that. I gotta say, they were very interesting and exciting days to work.
Thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Of course, we still had the random flow that was operating further south that wasn't impacted, of course, but
yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, guys. I think that's a real good point to end on. And I'm afraid that is all the time we've got today. So I'd like to thank Gav, Rich and Arnie for what's been a fascinating discussion, and everybody that's been watching this at home. So Altitude's going to be back in a few weeks. So please stay tuned, keep an eye on our social media sites, and you'll get some information on the next event that's coming up. And in the meantime, if anyone has got any feedback or they want to ask any questions, you can get us at info@nats.co.uk. That's info@nats.co.uk. If anybody's got any specific questions for anybody on the panel today, then you can put them into that address, and we'll be sure to answer them directly, pass it out to Arnie, Rich and Gav. I've not discussed this with you, but I'm sure you'll be happy with that. So thanks again, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.